I spent 3 years in a wheelchair to save Julian, and all I got in return was a terminal cancer diagnosis. I came home to find him with his arms around a younger man, guiding his hand as he painted a sunflower. Keep your hand steady just like I taught you. The boy was wearing my pajamas and using my art supplies. Even the easel was the one I won an award with. Julian frowned and shooed me away. The housekeeper's room is downstairs. Don't bother Silas while he's learning to paint. That night, during a storm, my wheelchair got stuck at the villa's gate, and my diagnosis papers were soaked and ruined by the rain. Behind me, I heard Silas's delighted voice. Mr. Astaire, did all of Sean's paintings sell? Can I use that empty studio now? Julian's reply was gentle. Of course. His things should have been cleared out a long time ago. I looked down at the date on my diagnosis. It was the exact day he met Silas. It turns out my life and my love were both sentenced to death on the same day. The cold metal pressed into my palm as I turned the wheels of my chair, stopping in front of the heavy, cold wrought iron gates of the Astaire villa. The blue light of the fingerprint lock glowed faintly, like a prying eye. I touched my finger to it. There was no familiar beep, only dead silence. The passcode, I tried my birthday, Julian's birthday, our anniversary. Every entry was like a stone dropped into the ocean. The gate didn't budge. The late autumn evening wind was already bitingly cold, whipping up the dead leaves on the ground and lashing them against my numb legs. It was a cold, sharp pain. Inside the gate, the huge second-floor French window was brightly lit. A warm yellow glow spilled out, the kind of warmth that should have meant I was home, but now it hung before me like poisoned honey. The window was cracked open, and the wind carried a muffled voice, tinged with a gentleness I'd never heard from Julian before, something close to doting. Keep your hands steady like this. His voice was low and pleasant, each syllable striking my frayed nerves. Don't rush. Take your time. Just like I taught you. My heart felt like it had been seized by an icy hand, stopping for a moment before starting to pound wildly and erratically, making my chest ache. A strong, ominous premonition gripped me, smelling of rust. I instinctively turned my wheelchair, the wheels crunching over the gravel as I moved toward the inconspicuous side door by the garage, the one leading to the service hallway. There was always a spare key there for Mr. Wallace. Once, it had been a sign of Julian's thoughtfulness. Now it was my only humiliating way into my own home. The key slid into the lock. With a soft turn, the door opened. A wave of scents I knew intimately hit me. Turpentine, linseed oil, and the unique smell of paint. This aroma used to be my soul's comfort, but now it was so strong it almost choked me. I guided the wheelchair, gliding silently across the cold, mirror-like marble floor toward the elevator to the second floor. The elevator doors opened and closed without a sound, carrying me toward that brightly lit room. The bedroom door was ajar, letting out an even brighter light and the low, patient sound of his voice. Yes, a little lighter on the brushstroke, and the texture of the petals will come out. You're so smart. Julian's voice was filled with undisguised admiration. My wheelchair stopped at the doorway like a cold reef, framed by the door. Everything before me was like the most absurd and cruel silent film, its sharp edges stabbing into my eyes. Julian had his back to the door, his posture as tall and straight as ever. He was bent over slightly, his arms wrapped gently around a young man's body. His right hand, the same well-defined hand that had wiped away my tears and traced my features countless times, was now covering another slender, pale hand, guiding a paintbrush as it smeared a piercingly bright lemon yellow onto the white canvas. On the canvas, a huge sunflower was blooming, distorted and showy, full of a clumsy imitation, yet possessing a predatory kind of vitality. The easel was the one Julian had custom-made for me when I won the Emerging Artist Gold Medal. Heavy walnut with my initials, SW, carved into the base. The brushes were my treasured set of German sable hair, stored in a custom wooden box, each one soaked with my passion and time. The paints were the expensive brand I always used. The lemon yellow squeezed onto the palette was like a solidified piece of sunlight, but now it burned my eyes. And the boy nestled in Julian's arms. The soft, loose silk pajamas he wore had a tiny, almost invisible sailboat embroidered on the collar. Those were my pajamas. After I was paralyzed, I was always cold, so Julian had them custom-made from the warmest material, With a little sailboat he drew himself. The boy's head was tilted slightly, revealing the elegant line of his neck. He listened to Julian's instructions with a focused, dependent expression, a sweet flush of being cherished on his face. My stomach suddenly churned, and a cold wave of nausea rose in my throat. I bit down hard on the inside of my lip until I tasted rust. My nails dug deep into the soft cushions of the wheelchair's armrests, almost tearing through the leather. My blood seemed to freeze solid for a second, then ignite the next, rushing wildly through my veins, searing every last bit of my sanity. The wheelchair's wheels scraped against the expensive marble floor, making an extremely faint but impossible to ignore creak. It wasn't loud, but in the carefully crafted warm atmosphere, it was like a stone tossed into a calm lake. The two figures huddled by the canvas froze. Julian slowly, almost with the annoyance of being interrupted, turned his head. His handsome face, once etched with worry, heartache, and intense love, was now covered in a layer of unfamiliar frost. His gaze, like a cold probe, shot across the distance and landed squarely on me. There was no surprise in his eyes, no joy of reunion, only the irritation of being interrupted and a kind of condescending scrutiny, as if looking at an unwelcome piece of old furniture that didn't belong. His brow furrowed sharply, and his thin lips pressed into a hard, cold line. "Sean?" His voice was like ice, every word cold and metallic. "When did you get back?" He didn't move away from the boy. His arm didn't even shift from the boy's waist. The posture was a silent declaration, an act of possession. I opened my mouth, but my throat felt like it was clogged with sandpaper, too dry to make a sound. Only the frantic heart in my chest hammered against my ribs like a drum, making my ears ring. Julian's gaze lingered on my rigid face for a moment, then shifted away as if another glance was a waste of time. His eyes fell to the wheelchair beneath me, the cold metal frame seeming to intensify the impatience in his voice. "The housekeeper's room is downstairs," he said quickly, his tone a clear dismissal. "Mrs. Zhang should have it ready for you. If you need anything, ask her." He gestured vaguely toward the stairs with his chin, his gaze returning to the canvas and the boy in his arms. His tone instantly switched back to that heartbreaking gentleness, but it was no longer for me. "Silas, don't get distracted. That last stroke was good. Keep going." The boy named Silas finally peeked out from behind Julian's arm, looking at me timidly, with a hint of curiosity. His eyes were large and clear, like a fawn's that had never seen the world, but now they were filled with the look of a stranger. He murmured a soft "oh" and picked up his brush again, though his movements were clearly distracted, his eyes still darting toward me. "The housekeeper's room? Ask Mrs. Zhang?" Every word was like a red-hot nail hammered into my ears, piercing my heart. The memory of that day 3 years ago, of throwing myself at an out-of-control car to save him, the smell of burning metal and the sharp pain of shattering bone, instantly shattered the composure I was struggling to maintain. For that accident, I lost my ability to walk, forever trapped in this cold metal prison. Every physical therapy session for the past 3 years, every agonizing pain, every struggle on the brink of despair, all of it, for a casual "the housekeeper's room is downstairs." Blood rushed to my head, then drained away in an instant, leaving me ice cold. My lips began to tremble uncontrollably. I wanted to question him, to scream, to throw all the injustices of the past 3 years and the humiliation of this moment right back in his cold, indifferent face. But my body betrayed me, drained of all strength. Even lifting a finger felt impossibly difficult. Only my teeth chattered, clenching painfully. I stared at him, stared at Silas nestled in his arms, wearing my pajamas, using my art supplies, as a metallic taste flooded my throat. I clutched the thin piece of paper in my pocket. The terminal cancer diagnosis. That cold, death-sentencing piece of paper was now the only thing supporting me, and the only thing cruelly mocking me. Just then, as if he had just remembered something, Silas paused his brush in midair, turned his head, and looked at Julian with those big, innocent eyes. His voice was soft, with a perfectly calibrated hesitation. "Mr. Astaire, who is this gentleman?" Julian's gaze barely left the canvas. He patted Silas's back with a casual, reassuring gesture, his voice flat, as if introducing an insignificant stranger. "Sean. He used to live here." He paused, then added a sentence that sealed my past existence behind the label of used to. He's back to recover. He's staying downstairs. Used to live here. Back to recover. Staying downstairs. 9 words, spoken so lightly, yet they were like 9 poisoned daggers, precisely stabbing through the last of my crumbling support. So, in Julian's world, the Sean who once occupied his entire heart, who would have given his life for him, had long been swept into the dustbin of the past. Now I was just a burden, an old possession, someone who needed to recover and be stashed downstairs. A massive roar exploded in my head. Everything before me, the warm yellow light, the vibrant sunflower, Julian's cold profile, Silas's curious gaze tinged with a subtle sense of superiority, began to shake violently, to spin and distort, until it was all swallowed by a thick, suffocating darkness. As my consciousness sank into a cold sea, the last thing I felt was my body slumping forward, my forehead hitting the cold metal armrest of the wheelchair with a dull thud. Darkness, endless darkness. I was floating in and out of consciousness, as if submerged at the bottom of a cold, viscous sea. There were muffled voices around me, sounding like they were coming through thick, frosted glass. Couldn't make them out. What happened? Did he pass out? A voice said, tinged with annoyance. He must be scared, right? He's so pale. Another, younger voice replied cautiously. Mrs. Zhang. Mrs. Zhang. Get him downstairs. Don't let him be in the way. The annoyed voice grew louder, sharply piercing the chaos. Then, I felt my body being moved, like a lifeless sack of goods, taken away from that suffocating place. Rough fabric scraped against my cheek, an unfamiliar texture, smelling of cheap laundry detergent. Bumps, continuous bumps all the way down the stairs. Each jolt tugged at the old, hidden pain deep in my spine. Finally, I was placed on a narrow, hard bed. The sheets beneath me were damp and smelled of old, unaired fabric, mixed with a faint scent of disinfectant and the nauseating smell of cooking oil drifting up from the kitchen downstairs. I think someone changed me into dry clothes, but the fabric was coarse and abrasive, nothing like the soft cotton I was used to. I don't know how much time passed before my consciousness slowly, heavily, began to return. My eyelids felt like they weighed a dunk. I forced them open a crack. Dim light, a low ceiling. A few dusty old cardboard boxes were stacked in the corner. The cramped space held only a single bed, a dilapidated wooden table, and a chair. There were no windows. The only light source was a thin line of light from the hallway seeping under the door. This was the housekeeper's room, in the corner of the lowest level of the Astaire villa. Before, only Mrs. Zhang would occasionally take a nap here. Now it was my new home. My throat was as dry as if it had been scraped with sandpaper, burning with pain. I tried to push myself up, but my arms were limp and powerless. The slightest movement brought on a dizzy spell, and my stomach churned. Cough, cough, cough. A violent coughing fit erupted without warning, tearing at my fragile chest. Every breath was a sharp, cutting pain. I hurriedly covered my mouth, my body convulsing with each cough, curling into a ball. A familiar, warm, metallic-tasting fluid surged into my throat. I opened my hand. In the dim light, my palm held a small, glaringly viscous pool of dark red. Blood. I was coughing up blood again. The realization wrapped around my heart like a cold snake, squeezing so tightly I could barely breathe. Despair washed over me like an icy tide, flooding my entire body. I collapsed onto the cold bed, gasping for air, each breath laced with a burning pain and the taste of blood. My blurry eyes scanned the cramped, cold, musty prison, the housekeeper's room. So this really was all I had left. Something hard was pressing against me in my pocket. It was the diagnosis. With trembling fingers, I fumbled to pull it out. In the faint sliver of light from under the door, I looked again at those cold, printed words. Terminal, metastasized, prognosis. Every word was like a sledgehammer, striking my already shattered heart. My gaze locked, almost masochistically, on the clearly printed date in the bottom right corner of the report. That date, it was like a pale bolt of lightning, unexpectedly tearing through my chaotic memories. That date, it was exactly 3 months ago, the day Julian first attended that so-called young artists' charity gala. He came back very late that night, smelling of a strange, crisp perfume. I was still in my wheelchair then, enduring the intense pain from my spinal rehab, clumsily heating up milk for him in the kitchen. When he took the cup, his eyes were distant. He just said simply, met a few interesting newcomers at the gala, and then hurried to his study. That date, the day my own countdown to death was declared, was the same day he met Silas. A bone-deep chill, 100 times colder than this damp room, shot up from my feet to the top of my head, freezing every nerve. So, at the very moment I received my death sentence, at that glittering gala, Julian's eyes had already landed on another interesting newcomer. My life and my love were sentenced to death on the same day, by the same person, silently and cruelly. How absurd. How ironic. My heart felt like it was being squeezed by an invisible hand and then crushed, the pain so intense that my vision went black and I almost fainted again. I clutched the thin piece of paper, my knuckles turning white from the force. The paper groaned under the pressure, almost tearing apart. Just then, I heard hushed voices in the hallway outside the door. It was Mrs. Zhang and a young man. Mr. Silas, why did you come down? It's windy out. Oh, Mrs. Zhang, I just came down to see, and to ask. Mr. Astaire said that studio is being cleared out for me. The things that belonged to Mr. Wallace. It was Silas's voice, tentative but with an undeniable hint of excitement. Have they all been dealt with? Mrs. Zhang's voice paused, sounding troubled. Well, Mr. Astaire did give the order to clear it out, but some of the art supplies, the sketches, after all. Silas's voice immediately rose a little, tinged with a pout and a sense of grievance. Mrs. Zhang, you know Mr. Astaire promised me that studio for my workshop. Having all that old stuff in there just takes up space and ruins the mood. Besides, his voice dropped, carrying a secretive, victorious tone. Mr. Astaire said that Sean's things should have been cleared out a long time ago. Should have been cleared out a long time ago. Those 7 words, like 7 poisoned bullets, shot through the thin door and straight into my heart. Boom! The last faint, self-deceiving glimmer of hope was utterly obliterated. So, on the same day I was sentenced to death, while I was still clinging to a faint hope for the future and my attachment to him, while I was still thinking about how to cooperate with treatment and not cause him trouble, he was already planning how to erase every trace of my existence, how to make room for that interesting newcomer. Even my last remaining sanctuary, the studio that held my entire soul, was to be wiped away, along with the paintings, the colors that held all my emotions, dreams, and pain. All of it was to be cleared out like trash. A violent cough surged up again, more intense than before, as if I was trying to hack up my entire lungs. I curled up on the cold bed, my body shaking violently, like a dry leaf about to shatter in the wind. Every cough pulled at the sharp pain in my chest and abdomen, and more of the metallic taste of blood filled my mouth. I bit down hard on my lip, refusing to let a whimper of pain escape. My teeth dug deep into the flesh, and I tasted a stronger metallic sweetness. Tears streamed uncontrollably down my face, hot against my cold cheeks, hitting the rough sheets and quickly spreading into small, dark, wet patches. Outside, a storm had started. Heavy raindrops pounded violently on the villa's roof, windows, and the garden plants, creating a continuous, deafening roar. The wind howled mournfully, like countless wailing ghosts. This overwhelming clamor perfectly concealed all the despair and brokenness within my tiny prison. I huddled in the darkness, an empty shell drained of its soul, left with nothing but endless cold and pain. The crumpled diagnosis was clutched tightly in my sweaty palm. That cold date was like a brand, searing my skin, searing my heart. Turns out I had been dead since that day. My world had completely collapsed 3 months ago. I was just too slow, too foolish, to see the bloody, belated truth until this very moment, in this cold housekeeper's room, amidst the deafening roar of the storm. The storm showed no signs of stopping. It grew more violent, as if trying to wash the entire city into a dark abyss. The wind whipped icy rain against every window of the villa, making a heart-stopping cracking sound. The housekeeper's room had no windows, only a line of pale hallway light seeping from under the door, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, adding to the oppressive silence. The pain inside my body was like countless tiny poison needles coursing through my bones and organs. Every breath brought a burning sensation and the lingering taste of blood. The diagnosis, the piece of paper that announced the end of my life and ruthlessly exposed the death of my love, was now clutched in my sweaty palm like a cold brand, constantly reminding me of my cruel double death sentence. I couldn't stay here any longer. Once the thought arose, it spread like wildfire, instantly consuming any remaining trace of hesitation. Every second I stayed in this place, breathing, this air thick with betrayal and abandonment, was a form of torture. I had to leave. I had to leave right now. Leave this so-called home. Leave the man who now saw me as old furniture. Leave the Silas who had taken everything from me. Leave this suffocating despair. An almost brutal force propped up my broken body. I gritted my teeth, enduring the grinding pain and dizziness, and slowly moved my stiff lower body. I gripped the cold metal armrests of the wheelchair and, with all my strength, dragged my heavy, clumsy body onto it. Every movement pulled at the old injury in my spine and the burning pain in my chest. A cold sweat instantly soaked through my coarse clothes. The moment I was settled, I slumped over the armrests, gasping for air. My vision went black in waves, and that familiar metallic taste rose in my throat again, but I forced it back down. I can't collapse here. I can't. I maneuvered the wheelchair, gliding silently toward the door. When I turned the doorknob, the cold metal made my fingertips tremble. The door opened. The hallway was empty, lit only by a dim, yellow wall lamp. A strange, faint smell of turpentine and new wood hung in the air, drifting down from upstairs. Was Silas's new studio being set up? The thought was another needle to my heart. I took a deep breath, suppressed the turmoil of emotions, and guided the wheelchair toward the villa's main entrance. The wheels rolled over the cold, smooth tiles, making a soft, echoing sound that seemed deafeningly loud in the empty, silent villa. My heart was in my throat, terrified of waking the people upstairs. Luckily, only the roar of the storm ruled the night, drowning out my insignificant movements. Finally, the heavy front door was right in front of me. I reached out, my fingers trembling slightly from the effort, and pressed the button to open it, where the heavy electric gate slowly slid to one side. Instantly, the full force of the wind and rain roared in, no longer muffled, like a breaking dam. A cold, wet wind slapped my face and body like 1,000 hands, instantly soaking my hair and thin clothes. The chill was bone-deep. The downpour formed a chaotic curtain of rain, completely blurring and distorting the world outside. The faint light from the porch only illuminated a small, wet patch of ground at the doorway. Beyond that lay endless darkness and a surging world of water. My wheelchair, the metal prison that carried me and confined me, stopped at the threshold between the porch and the storm, like a small boat run aground on the edge of a raging sea. I have to get out. I gritted my teeth, pushed the wheels, and lunged forward. The cold, heavy rain instantly slammed down on my head and shoulders, chilling me to the bone. Just as the wheels rolled off the dry porch and sank into the soft, rain-soaked mud and gravel outside, a powerful, unexpected resistance hit me. The front right wheel was completely stuck. My heart sank. I pushed harder on the rims. The metal rims were cold and slick, with almost no friction. The left wheel could still turn with difficulty, pulling the chair slightly forward, but the right side was completely immobile. The entire wheelchair was tilted at an awkward angle, trapped in place. Every push just made the chair slip and rock uselessly in the mud, splashing up dirty water. How could this happen? I leaned forward, the cold rain immediately pouring down the back of my neck. Using the faint light from the porch, I anxiously looked at the stuck right wheel. My vision was blurred by the rain. I could only vaguely see that the wheel seemed to have fallen into a narrow but deep crack in the mud, like a trap formed by the upturned edge of a loose paving stone. Mud, gravel, and leaves were packed tightly into the space between the wheel and the crack. Ugh, I grunted, using all my strength to wrench the wheel rims again. My arms trembled violently from the strain, feeling sore and weak. The burning pain in my chest surged again, and a metallic taste filled my throat. The wheelchair just rocked violently. The right wheel remained stuck, buried deep in the mud, completely immobile. The cold rain washed over me mercilessly, streaming down my hair, cheeks, and neck, soaking me completely. My thin clothes clung to my skin, bringing a bone-piercing chill. My body began to shake uncontrollably. Despair, like this cold rain, seeped into every part of me, into my very bones. I tried again and again, each attempt only, leading to sinking deeper and rocking more violently. Just then, a piece of paper, softened and tattered by the rain, slipped out of my pocket during my struggle. It fluttered down and landed in the muddy water. It was my diagnosis. It was quickly soaked through by the murky water, the paper turning translucent. The cold, printed words on it, my name, the terms of my death sentence, that glaring date, began to blur, bleed, and dissolve in the rain. The ink ran like black tears, swirling in the muddy water until it became a chaotic mess, impossible to read. The paper that announced the end of my life and ruthlessly exposed the death of my love, my only cold proof, was being slowly and cruelly erased before my eyes by this cold storm. Just like Julian wanted to erase every trace of my existence. I stared blankly at the paper disintegrating in the mud, watching the ink that symbolized my countdown to death being mercilessly swallowed and diluted by the rain, finally becoming an unidentifiable stain mixed into the filth at my feet. A huge, hollow sense of absurdity seized me. Was even this last piece of proof to be taken from me? Was even the right to leave with clear hatred and evidence to be denied? Cold water streamed down my face. I couldn't tell if it was rain or tears. My body trembled violently from the cold and pain, my teeth chattering. I gave up the struggle, slumping into the cold wheelchair, letting the storm beat down on me. My blurry gaze lifted, looking past the raging rain toward the huge second-floor French window of the villa. It was still brightly lit, like a warm, unreachable dream. Through the glass, distorted and blurred by the streaming rain, I could vaguely make out the scene inside. Silas's figure stood by the window, seemingly on his tiptoes, holding a cloth or rag, wiping the inside of the glass, perhaps to get a better view of the storm outside? Or maybe he was just wiping the window itself. His movements seemed relaxed and content. And Julian stood right behind him, very, very close. One hand rested naturally and casually on Silas's slender waist. It was a gesture full of possession and protection. The warm yellow light enveloped them gently, outlining their huddled silhouette. The window reflected their blurry but cozy figures, like an invisible barrier, completely separating them from the cold, dark, and desperate world of the storm outside. My wheelchair was mired in the cold mud at the gate, like a forgotten, dilapidated marker on the edge of the apocalypse. My diagnosis had completely dissolved into a filthy pulp, washed away by the rain, slowly sinking into the dirty soil and disappearing. Even that last, cold piece of proof was mercilessly erased by the storm. Above me was the raging sky, the cold rain lashing down like a whip, soaking me to the bone. My body was long past numb. I couldn't distinguish between the freezing cold and the gnawing burn of cancer in my organs. They intertwined, creating a dull, constant torment. Every faint breath pulled at a tearing pain deep in my chest. The familiar taste of rust in my throat grew stronger, but I no longer had the strength to cough. My vision was a blur of rain, the world reduced to chaotic spots of light and a deafening roar. But the warm yellow light from the second-floor window was like a searing brand, piercing through the rain and burning itself onto my retinas. The scene inside, distorted and warped by the flowing water, was nonetheless branded with horrifying clarity. Silas, bathed in the warm light, looked slender and full of life. He tilted his head, seeming to admire the storm, or perhaps he was wiping the massive window with the casual air of a homeowner. And Julian, the man who once promised me the world, stood just a step behind him. The gentle light softened the lines of his profile, and a faint smile seemed to play on his lips. His hand, the hand that had so often brushed away my tears and traced my dreams, was now resting steadily, with an undeniable possessiveness, on Silas's young waist. That posture was a silent declaration. It declared that this was his territory, that this spot had a new owner. It was cozy, harmonious, as perfect as a meticulously painted masterpiece. And outside the frame, I was just a rain-soaked stain that needed to be cleaned away. It turned out that without me, their love was so complete, so warm. An icy, sweet rush surged up my throat. I clamped my jaw shut, using my last shred of willpower to force it down. I will not collapse here. I will not let them see me like this, see my end. My gaze painfully shifted from that blinding window to the wheel stuck in the mud. The mud, gravel, and leaves had it pinned. My previous struggles had only made it worse. Leave. I must leave. An almost insane thought propped me up. I reached out with my cold, trembling, nearly numb hands and gripped the cold metal rims of the wheels. My fingertips dug into the non-slip texture, a sharp pain shooting through them. I leaned my body as far forward as possible, trying to shift my center of gravity, putting all my weight on the left wheel that could still turn. A low, animalistic growl, mixed with the taste of blood, tore from my throat. Every muscle in my body tensed to its limit. A tearing pain exploded from my spine and chest, and my vision was instantly flooded with red. All my willpower, all my anger, all my despair, transformed into this one desperate push. The wheelchair lurched violently. The stuck right wheel, under the immense, almost self-destructive force, made a sickening metallic grinding sound and managed to break free a few inches from the crack and the mud. Now, ignoring the gut-wrenching pain and the black spots in my vision, I used my remaining strength to frantically, recklessly turn the still-moving left wheel rim. The wheelchair, off balance and looking like it was about to fall apart, shot forward. The wheels rolled over slick gravel and mud, splashing dirty water everywhere. The wheelchair finally broke free from the muddy trap and plunged into the dark, storm-ruled world beyond the villa's iron gates. The cold rain instantly enveloped me. Behind me, the gate slowly, silently closed, like a cold, indifferent mouth shutting, completely severing my last, insignificant connection to that home. The warm light from the villa was sealed behind the heavy gate, leaving only the pale glow from the porch, like a graveyard's will-o'-the-wisp, coldly illuminating the muddy, ravaged patch of ground where I had struggled. I didn't look back. I pushed the lopsided, cold wheelchair along the slick private road, heading into the deeper, endless darkness and rain. The wheels churned with difficulty through the puddles, leaving 2 tracks that were quickly washed away by the storm. Inside the villa, on the 2nd floor, the warm yellow light in the massive window still shone softly. Silas seemed to have finished wiping the glass. He put down the cloth, tilted his head up, and said something with a smile to Julian behind him. Julian looked down, the light casting soft shadows on his face. His lips moved in response. Then he raised his hand and, with natural, doting affection, gently ruffled Silas's soft hair. On the window, the newly finished painting of the huge, brilliant sunflower was reflected. The intense lemon yellow burned under the light, each petal twisted and flamboyant, full of clumsy imitation, yet radiating a predatory, dazzling brilliance. The torrential rain completely swallowed the small, crumbling figure that disappeared into the darkness outside. The wheelchair, lopsided and looking like a ship about to capsize, struggled onward through the violent, rainy night. The icy rain had long since soaked me to the bone. Every time a wheel hit a pothole, a sharp jolt rocked me, making my organs feel like they were being rearranged. Pain and cold, like relentless leeches, gnawed at my fading consciousness. My vision was severely blurred. I moved mechanically, guided only by instinct and the muscle memory of a path I had traveled countless times, toward one destination. The old studio that had once held all my dreams and had ultimately pushed me into this abyss. The world was nothing but the roar of the rain and my own heavy, labored breathing. My lungs felt like a broken bellows. Every inhalation brought a burning pain and the thick taste of blood. Several times, a coughing fit almost suffocated me. The only thing keeping me going was an almost obsessive thought. I cannot die here. I cannot die in Julian's line of sight. If I am to die, I will die somewhere that still has a trace of Sean left in it. I don't know how long it took. It felt like I had traversed an eternity of darkness and cold before the familiar silhouette of the old building, located in a dilapidated arts district on the edge of the city, finally appeared through the chaotic curtain of rain. The building was old and mottled, looking like it might collapse in the storm. I steered the nearly broken wheelchair, and with my last bit of strength, I rammed open the rusted, ajar iron gate and rolled into the empty, cold first-floor lobby. This place was once a haven for broke, dreamy artists like my younger self. Now it was abandoned, filled with debris and the pungent smell of dust, mold, and dampness. The elevator was long out of service. The stairwell was a black hole, like a giant mouth ready to swallow everything. My studio was at the end of the hall on the 3rd floor. There was no turning back. I looked up at the steep, cold, winding staircase, as if I were looking at the final steps to hell. A cold despair mixed with a crazed determination flooded my heart. Leave the wheelchair? On these legs that had already been sentenced to death. With this body, hollowed out by cancer and shattered by betrayal? But to stay here was to wait for death. Wait for Julian to find me? Wait for Silas to look down on my corpse with pity or scorn? No. My hands gripped the cold, damp railing. The chill of the metal pierced my palms. I gritted my teeth, my mouth filled with the thick taste of rust. My body screamed in agony, as if being torn apart. Every cell was protesting. I summoned every last bit of strength and violently dragged myself out of the wheelchair. Thud! My body hit the hard, cold concrete floor. The dull sound of bone hitting the ground was masked by the rain. Sharp pain shot through me. My vision went completely black, and I saw stars. Cold mud and dust smeared across my face. The metallic taste in my throat could no longer be suppressed. With a retch, a large mouthful of dark red blood splattered onto the filthy floor, quickly spreading in the rainwater like a blooming flower of despair. I lay on the cold ground, gasping, each breath a ragged, hoarse sound from a broken bellows, bringing more intense pain. My forehead pressed against the rough concrete. The cold sensation brought back a sliver of my dissolving consciousness. I can't stop. Julian's face, Silas nestled in his arms, that glaring sunflower. The words should have been cleared out a long time ago. They were like red-hot brands on my heart, searing it with a deep-seated hatred and humiliation. This hatred became the only fuel for my broken body. I lifted my head, a mixture of rain and blood streaming down my face. My hands once again clawed at the cold edge of the stairs, my nails scraping against the rough concrete with a sickening sound. Like a dying worm, I dragged myself upward, inch by inch with all my might. My arms, my shoulders, my core, every part of me that could exert force was burning, crying out in protest. My legs were just dead weight, dragging uselessly behind me. One step, then another. With every pull, I left a winding trail of mud, dust, and dark red blood. Every pause was accompanied by violent coughing and vomiting blood. My consciousness teetered on the edge of collapse, torn between agony and oxygen deprivation. The cold, damp air of the stairwell grew thick with the smell of blood. Time lost all meaning. There was only pain and the obsessive need to move upward. Finally, just as my last ounce of strength was about to give out, when my vision was nothing but blurry spots of light, my hand touched the cold, rough concrete of the third floor. I collapsed at the top of the stairs like a melted pile of sludge, without even the strength to lift a finger. The floor beneath me was bone-chillingly cold. My clothes were soaked through, clinging to my skin as my body temperature plummeted. Only the faint, stubborn beat of my heart still pulsed, a futile protest. The studio door was just a few feet away. That familiar, paint-chipped old wooden door now seemed a world away. With my last ounce of willpower, I turned onto my side and, like a beached fish, began to inch my body toward it. The cold, rough floor scraped against my skin, a minor irritation compared to the churning agony inside me. Closer, closer. My fingertips finally touched the cold wood of the door. Using my last bit of energy, I pressed my head against the door and gave it a weak shove with my shoulder. Creak, the door opened. A thick wave of dust and the old, mixed scent of paint hit me, carrying a desolate, lifeless smell. I rolled inside. The studio was a mess, but it wasn't empty as I had imagined. Julian hadn't gotten around to clearing it out yet, or rather, he couldn't be bothered to personally clean up this trash. Dust-covered canvases were stacked in a corner. Some discarded frames leaned against the wall, and the floor was littered with crumpled sketches and dried-up paint tubes. But the most glaring thing was in the center of the room. There stood a huge, brand-new easel, not the walnut one Silas was using in the villa, but a cheap, synthetic one. And on it was a huge, unfinished sketch of a sunflower. The lines were stiff, the composition a clumsy imitation, but it exuded a bossy urgency to claim ownership. Next to it, scattered about, were a few new tubes of paint, a cheap palette, and a few neatly folded, trendy pieces of clothing that were clearly not mine. Silas's things. He had already invaded even here, this last corner that belonged to me. Julian not only allowed it but had likely arranged it himself. The last faint beat of my heart seemed to freeze at the sight. What rose in my throat was no longer blood, but a cold numbness that smelled of death. I lay on the cold, dusty floor, my head turned to the side, my gaze fixed on that unfinished, Dahlia sunflower sketch. The raging storm outside seemed to fade away, the sounds of the world rapidly receding. The pain in my body miraculously began to subside, replaced by a heavy, boundless exhaustion, as if my soul were being pulled down by an immense force. So tired. I'm so tired. Fragments of light and memory began to flash before my eyes. The blinding afternoon sun 3 years ago. The screech of brakes, Julian's terrified face as he lunged toward me. The sharp smell of disinfectant in the hospital, his hand gripping mine, his red-rimmed eyes filled with pain and fear as he repeated over and over, "Sean, don't be afraid. I'm here. I'll always be here." The gut-wrenching pain of physical therapy, him holding my sweat-drenched body, his voice choked with emotion, "Sean, we'll take it slow. I'll be with you for the rest of our lives." Those memories were so clear, so warm, yet so distant, as if from another lifetime. They intertwined with the cold glare in the villa, the pajamas on Silas, the icy words "the housekeeper's room is downstairs," the wheelchair stuck in the storm, the rain-soaked diagnosis, the silhouette of them embracing in the window, all the love, all the pain, all the hatred, all the humiliation, swirled violently in my dying days, colliding and finally dissolving into a silent sigh. It turns out, from the moment I threw myself at that out-of-control car, my life was already pawned to him. And my love, on the same day he met Silas and I got my diagnosis, it had already expired. My eyelids, too heavy to hold up any longer, slowly, completely closed. My last wisp of consciousness sank into a cold, black sea. Outside the studio window, the storm continued to rage, washing over the city, covering all the small sounds, and concealing the silent passing of a soul, utterly abandoned by the world, in this old studio. 3 months later, the top floor of the Astaire Corporation headquarters, in the CEO's office. Beyond the massive floor-to-ceiling windows was the glittering nightscape of the city, a river of lights and traffic. Julian leaned back in his large leather chair, a half-smoked cigarette between his fingers. The smoke swirled around him, blurring his handsome but weary profile. On the desk before him lay an open file with Sean Wallace's name on it. A death certificate. Cause of death: multiple organ failure due to metastatic late-stage cancer. The date was printed clearly. He stared at the date, his eyes hollow, as if trying to see through the numbers. That date, memory was a dull, rusty knife, slowly and cruelly slicing through his nerves. It was the day he first met Silas, the boy at the charity gala who looked at him with the timid adoration of a fresh young sapling. He remembered being in a strangely good mood that day, feeling like a fresh, vibrant ray of sunshine had finally broken into his life. He had even forgotten he was supposed to pick up Sean's follow-up report from the hospital that day. He just remembered rushing home and vaguely telling Sean he'd met an interesting newcomer at the gala. What was Sean's expression then? Sitting in his wheelchair, his face pale, the hand that heated his milk seeming to tremble. What was he doing? He thinks he just took the milk, gave a perfunctory reply, and went to his study, lost in the novelty of having met Silas. His heart felt like it was being squeezed by an icy hand, contracting sharply, bringing a piercing, suffocating pain. Ash fell onto the expensive cashmere rug, burning a small dark spot, but he didn't notice. "Mr. Astaire?" His assistant's cautious voice sounded at the door. "The paintings you asked for, the ones from Mr. Wallace's old studio, they've been delivered. Per your instructions, we only took the portraits of you." Julian snapped back to reality, stubbing out the cigarette. His voice was laced with an almost imperceptible rasp. "Bring them in." The assistant pushed in a flat cart stacked with 7 or 8 paintings of various sizes, all carefully covered with dust cloths. "Put them over there." Julian pointed to an empty corner of the office, his eyes locked on the canvases. The assistant set down the paintings and respectfully left. The office fell back into a dead silence. Julian stood up and walked, his steps unsteady, to the pile of paintings. He reached out, his fingertips trembling slightly, and lifted the dust cloth off the first painting. On the canvas was a younger version of himself, dressed in a simple white shirt, reading by a window in the afternoon. Sunlight fell gently on his profile, casting a soft halo. The Julian in the painting had a focused, peaceful gaze, a faint, almost imperceptible smile on his lips, a smile he never knew he had. The entire painting was filled with gentle light and shadow, with brushstrokes so delicate they were overflowing with a love so thick. It was almost tangible. In the bottom right corner was Sean's neat signature and a small date. Julian's fingers traced the face of his painted self, as if he could feel the joy and cherish that filled the artist's heart with every stroke. The suffocating pain in his chest surged again. He eagerly uncovered the second, then the third. Everyone was of him. Him at work, frowning in thought. Him asleep, looking utterly defenseless. There was even one of him with a cold, wrapped in a blanket, only half his face showing, his eyes looking out with a hint of vulnerability and dependence. It was Sean's perspective. Every painting was Julian as seen through Sean's eyes. Warm, real, filled with the details of life and a love so intense it made his heart ache. The moments he himself had overlooked, or even forgotten, were eternally captured by Sean's brush. He had never felt so clearly how deeply, how completely he had been loved. The last painting was small. When he lifted the cloth, Julian's body froze, as if struck by lightning. He wasn't in the picture. There was only a sunflower, but it wasn't the imitative, showy, predatory sunflower that Silas painted. This was a withered sunflower. His giant head drooped low. The once golden petals were faded, curled, and blackened, like burnt paper, hanging limply. The thick stem was withered and covered in dark brown spots, bent in a desperate arc, as if it could snap at any moment. The background was a gray, oppressive sky, without a single ray of sunlight. The entire painting was shrouded in a dead, decaying, and desperate grayness. Only in the center of the withered flower head, painted with a thick, almost garish dark red, was a twisted, broken shape that looked like a heart that had been violently ripped out. The dark red was like dried, clotted blood, carrying a shocking sense of grief and accusation. In the bottom right corner again was Sean's signature, and the date was from 3 months ago, the day he had first brought Silas to the villa and told Sean to stay in the housekeeper's room. Julian stared at the painting, at the withered sunflower, at the twisted dark red heart. The overwhelming despair and sense of death emanating from the painting washed over him like a cold tide, drowning him. He could almost see Sean that night, huddled in the cold housekeeper's room, coughing up blood, using his last bit of strength and emotion to paint this final farewell. My life and my love have both expired. Sean's last, unsent message, that silent accusation, now exploded like thunder in his deadened heart. So he knew all along. He knew his life was coming to an end. And on that day, he had seen with absolute clarity the death of his love. And what was he, Julian Astaire, doing? He was in the warm light of the villa, holding a young Silas, teaching him how to paint a brilliant sunflower. He had coldly told Sean to stay downstairs. He had planned to clear out all of Sean's things. On that stormy night, he stood at the bright window, holding his new lover, watching Sean's wheelchair struggle in the mud, and did nothing. Ugh! A pained, choked sob escaped from deep in Julian's throat. He staggered back, his tall frame crashing into the cold glass of the window with a heavy thud. He covered his face, and between his fingers, a warm liquid gushed out, instantly blurring his vision. Not tears. It was hot, metallic-tasting blood. A violent, gut-wrenching cough erupted without warning. He bent over, his body convulsing, more bloody foam spilling from between his fingers, dripping onto the pristine floor, splashing into small, glaring flowers. He looked up, his bloodshot eyes fixed on the withered sunflower, on the broken, dark red heart in the painting. An immense wave of regret, pain, and overwhelming despair, like countless cold hands, dragged him down into a bottomless abyss. The glittering city lights outside his window, in his eyes, all went out. All that was left was the endless, gray, and dead sky from Sean's painting. He had personally buried his son, on the day his life and his love were both sentenced to death. And he, only now, finally saw the indelible bloodstains on his own hands. A belated cry of anguish echoed through the luxurious but cold and silent office, unheard and unanswered. Only the withered sunflower, in the dim light, silently told the cruel, buried truth of love and death.